So now we continue with our second presentation for this morning, second session, shifting consumer demand and innovation. They are rapidly changing the product market across all downstream industries. How do petrochemical leaders assess future needs and investment over a 30-year horizon in an uncertain world? Balancing investment, demand projections, global flows, and product mix are key challenges that will be discussed in this perspective on the evolving petrochemical ecosystem. This presentation is on future-proof strategies, petrochemicals in tomorrow's world. Our speaker is the managing partner and chairman of the board at A.T. Kearney. In addition to a 25-year career within the firm, he is the author of numerous articles and books on strategic business issues. His latest book, preliminarily titled Futureproof, Reclaiming Strategy for a World That Won't Stand Still, is slated for release in a few weeks, actually. Please welcome Mr. Johan Aurik. Mr. Aurik, kindly join us on stage. I hope I pronounced the name correctly.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished guests, thank you for inviting us to speak. Over the next 15 minutes or so, I will talk you fairly quickly to a few slides, and if you would like to read them afterwards, they're available on the website. What I really would like to leave with you is, in essence, a very simple thought. This conference, the discussions yesterday and today, are really about the future. What does the future look like? No one can predict the future, we all know that. However, the way we think about the future, the way we strategize for the future, that is something that we can change. And that is something that across industries, not only in the chemical industry, but in many industries, is something that we all need to work on. And that is the essence of what I would like to focus on in this presentation. First of all, it's an open door, but nonetheless true, that the world in which we live is changing at an unprecedented speed. And the way we therefore strategize and deal with that world, that is something that we need to work on and we need to improve. Increasing market volatility at unprecedented rate, increasing opportunity, increasing risk, so much that often strategists, executives are wondering where to put their investments in. And certainly in an industry that has a very long-term investment cycle, that is a very large and a very strategic problem. The strategic options are overwhelming. You see in the middle that picture of a chessboard. Strategy used to be in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, often compared to a game of chess, where there was a board and where each key, each pawn had a certain way of moving, with a lot of analysis behind that. That way of doing strategy is increasingly irrelevant. The chessboard, if you forgive me the metaphor, is a three-dimensional chessboard. All the players, everyone is moving all the time. It is impossible and increasingly impossible to predict. Analysis will not lead you out of that. So the question is really, is it possible to do a future-proof strategy? Does such a thing exist in a world that changes rapidly? We did research about that. We interviewed over the last 12 months around 2,000 executives worldwide across industries. And the answer was not really surprising. The answer was strategy development is becoming more complex. It is becoming much more time-consuming. And most important, it fails to truly deliver what people expect from it. The way we do strategy in the past needs to have another fresh look. I mentioned volatility. Just the economic cycle alone. If you look at the crises, certainly the last big one was 5 years ago now. But ever since then, the volatility and the uncertainty has really not gone away. I would argue it has even increased. The fundamental changing factors of that still are around us. And it's not only technology. And it's not only developments like sustainability and et cetera. It is certainly also aspects that have to do with geopolitics. This region is certainly one of them, but not only in this region. Geopolitics has come back to Europe. To the surprise of many people. Asia has that, et cetera, et cetera. We live in a very uncertain world that is highly connected, where investment cycles and strategies are extremely difficult to develop. Now, that same applies to the chemical industry, to the value chain of the chemicals industry, obviously. There's been a lot of discussions about shale and about feedstock and feedstock developments and price. Absolutely. There's been a lot of development of the consequences of these changing feedstock trends for technology. What many in the industry often do not see is the changes in the customers and in the customers of the customers, in the end customers. There the volatility and the changes even higher than in this industry, I would argue. So what does it take to be successful in strategy development today? We believe in essence three things. And there's a lot of literature and thinking in universities going on this. It's actually a very interesting area in the last few months. We believe that it's these three things combined that give companies, executives, we believe, a way out. First of all, the future cannot be predicted and can certainly not be predicted based on today and based on analysis and based on extrapolations. Extrapolations will not get you there. What is important is to look into the future itself, distinguish and analyze the trends and apply them to your industry and to your customers' industries. That perspective, instead of current out, future in. The second one, strategy development was often a top-down exercise. A report was produced by the top and was then given to the rest of the company to implement. That way of strategy development is increasingly obsolete. And by the way, it also takes simply too much time to put in place. Instead, strategy development needs to be inclusive, we believe. It needs to be done together with the company, together with the customers. It needs to be done in a co-creative way, as it's known nowadays so nicely. The third one, strategy development is not a sequential exercise that you do once every 3 or 5 years. Strategy development increasingly is a permanent exercise. And strategies have life cycles and need to be treated like a portfolio. The way we do strategy is fundamentally changing. Now, how do we apply this to the chemical industry? A few examples. A.T. Kearney developed over the last year, and some of you might have seen this already, a long-term vision of where we believe the chemical industry is going towards the year 2030. And out of all those various trends, I would like to highlight 3 of them to illustrate this way of looking at strategy and making it more future in. The first one is the impact of non-conventional feedstock, and particularly the volatility of the price. Familiar, I think, to many of you. The second one is the regional shifts that are taking place and where the world is growing and where the industry is growing, and what it means for the industry in terms of consolidation and in terms of fragmentation. And third of all, innovation, the role of innovation in a competitive landscape. I will illustrate each of these 3 briefly. The first one, and I think well known, but the implications we're struggling with still, is the shifts that have taken place in where feedstock basically come from, and the volatility of that. As the price of oil over the last years went up, what happened is that the sources of feedstock, the sources of oil and gas, changed over time. Shale indeed came, but many other different types of sources came. It opened up the wide range. It had enormous implications for price, and it had enormous implications for technology and for long-term investments. What certainly happened now with the drop in price is that it puts a lot of pressure on that. The future is impossible to predict, but what is certainly quite clear out of that picture is that the volatility and the implications and the need for companies, for chemical companies in this region, but frankly across the world, to look at it carefully, what the implications of that for their company is really increasing and is extremely important. Second, regional growth. If you look at this picture over several years of the top 10 chemical players, but also their sources, you see obviously the increase of Asia. And if you do this in this long-term perspective, it's really quite astonishing, that relative growth and the relative decline of, in the first place, Europe, and to a lesser extent, North America. What's interesting to see is that the top 10 chemical players globally has really shifted quite dramatically over time. 1985, it was largely a European and North American affair. Currently, that has already changed. The predictions for 2025 Who knows? Our predictions are that it will reflect the long-term market over time. What is not on this picture is this is the top 10. Below these top 10, there are many new, innovative, and highly specialized companies that we often have not even heard of. That list will be the real one, I think, to watch out for over the next years. One thing is to look at how your industry is changing. The second one is to look at how your customers' industries change. And most executives, most chemical companies that I talk to do not have that sufficiently on the radar screen, we find. The automotive industry and the construction industry, to pick two important ones, is also shifting. There you see that same shift towards Asia. Certainly in the automotive industry, that's the most extreme. That has very important customers, important consequences, where your customers are and what the demands are for your business. The established players, therefore, in the Fortune 500, and this is the general picture, is generally decreasing. And the emerging ones, again, often names we haven't even heard of, is really increasing rapidly. Your customer base will change. Every year, and this is the third, every year A.T. Kearney does a survey among chemical company clients, what they really value most, what they ask for. And we do that every year, so you can really see the trends over that. Some aspects have always been that. Availability and price is important and will always be important. There's no doubt about that. However, it is less and less of a differentiator. It is an entry ticket, so to speak. It is not a differentiator anymore, less and less. And what is increasing over time, and you see that in the yellow lines, is the demand for specialty features, for innovation. That is the demand really where the big value add is. That is what customers are asking for. So what is needed, and here you see a picture for the automotive industry. We feel one of the more innovative industries that has really been able to transform quite dramatically over time. Not only in terms of the increase of electronics, but certainly also in terms of the increase of new and advanced materials. Really a very successful industry in that sense in terms of change. The industry is changing, it's shifting towards Asia, that's clear. But what is happening underneath is very important trends that I think most chemical companies do not have on their radar screen sufficiently. And the way to look at this industry future in is to start at the end, to start at that side of the picture, at the consumers. Look at the trends like more sustainability, more convenience, more personalization, and translate that through the chemical value chain all the way upstream to see what it potentially can mean in terms of the demand for materials, the demands for where the materials need to be brought to, etc. A very important exercise that we feel most companies simply do not do. And if you add that on top of that, most chemical companies do not have sufficiently on their radar screen the new technologies, what is around the corner. A lot is known already about eco products. And here you see an example actually of a company that uses mushrooms to develop biodegradable plastics. Mind you, mushrooms. And that is already fairly mature, and a lot of executives we find have that well under control. What is very little known about is, for instance, the impact of 3D printing. For those of you that read the Financial Times yesterday, you saw, I thought, a very interesting article that 3D printing is at an inflection point, and we would agree with that. And the consequences of that, people are barely beginning to understand what it means. It means shifting supply chains, it means shifting customers, and simply it means shifting competitors. A very important impact that will change also your industry. And then technology, nanotechnology, will be very, very important, but it's still in its infancy. We're only beginning to understand the impact of that. These trends, and these are just 3 examples, we believe executives need to have that better on their radar screen, need to understand that better, and analyze what it means for them. So, in closing, because I promised to keep this short, we believe what makes a strategy future-proof, again, no one can predict the future, but we can better strategize for the future, we believe, is to do, in essence, 3 things, 3 principles behind that. One is to instead of current out and extrapolate what is known and the strategies that what is known and base it on analysis, look at what the future trends are for the end customers, for your direct customers, and for your industry. Analyze them and look at them strategically and methodologically, systematically, and look what the potential impacts are going to be for you and for your industry. That perspective, for many people have done that already for years, but actually most simply are beginning with that perspective. The second one is organizational inclusion. If you want a strategy that is rapidly accepted, that is implemented well, indeed using time, it's very important to develop a strategy in an inclusive way and not in an ivory tower way. You gain speed and the implementation becomes quite simply much more easy to do. And the third one is, do not think of strategy as a one-time exercise that is repeated every 3 to 5 years. Do it constantly, repeat it, and develop a portfolio of strategies, a completely different way of looking at that. Particularly for the chemical industry, with its very long investment cycle and its high impact of volatility in the world, we believe that is more important than ever. Thank you very much.